Be me, Tom, 30-something, office drone with a respectable title. Nothing flashy about it. Senior role on the marketing analytics side. I spend my days digging through numbers, spotting trends, and explaining to leadership which ideas are making money and which ones are lighting budgets on fire. Been in the same place long enough to know where all the skeletons are. Honestly, it was a solid arrangement, fair salary, work that kept my brain awake, and coworkers who were mostly competent adults. Our department had a reputation for being the dependable one. No theatrics, no petty nonsense, just people handling business. The previous manager was an old company fixture, straightforward guy, no favorites, no ego. His philosophy was basically, do your job and don't create headaches. Everything ran on results. Produce strong work. You got trust and better assignments. Coast too much. You got sidelined onto dull projects. Easy system. The atmosphere was relaxed too. Sometimes we'd eat lunch together, kill time talking sports, movies, whatever came up. Nobody cared about anything other than your ability to contribute to the team. It was a well-oiled machine, productive, efficient, and surprisingly low stress. Then, a few months back, our boss announced his retirement. We threw him a party, wished him well, and then waited to see who would take his place. The rumor mill was buzzing for a couple of weeks. We were all hoping for an internal promotion, maybe one of the other senior guys who knew the ropes. Instead, we get an all-hands email from corporate, introducing our new department head, Barbara. The email was full of the usual corporate buzzwords. A dynamic, forward-thinking leader with a passion for transformative workplace culture. It came with a professional headshot. Woman, maybe early 40s, severe haircut, glasses, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We were all a bit disappointed it wasn't an insider, but whatever. A new boss is a new boss. You just adapt. Her first day arrives. She walks into the office and the whole vibe just shifts. She doesn't do the normal walk around to say hello and shake hands. Instead, she immediately calls a mandatory department meeting in the main conference room. We all file in, grabbing coffee. Barbara stands at the head of the table, not smiling. She waits for everyone to be completely silent. Then she starts her introduction. It wasn't the usual, "I'm excited to be here, let's talk about our goals for the quarter," speech. Oh no, it was a 10-minute monologue about her vision, a vision that had very little to do with marketing analytics. She's talking about deconstructing existing power structures, dismantling patriarchal frameworks, and creating a truly equitable and inclusive space. I look around the table. Most of the guys have this blank, slightly confused look on their faces. A few of the women are nodding along, but it's hard to tell if it's genuine or just trying to make a good first impression. Grace, one of our junior analysts, seems really into it. She's young, and this kind of language probably sounds progressive and exciting to her. I'm just sitting there, thinking about a data modeling problem I need to solve for a client. Then Ronald chimes in. Ronald is a guy who has always been just there. He does the bare minimum, never excels, never fails spectacularly. He just coasts. He raises his hand like he's in school. Barbara points at him. I just want to say how incredibly refreshing it is to hear a leader speak with such clarity and moral purpose, he says, his voice dripping with sincerity. What can we, as male allies, do to support your vision from day one? I had to physically stop myself from rolling my eyes into the back of my head. Barbara gives him a warm, appreciative smile, the first real smile we've seen from her. That's an excellent question, Ronald. The first step is listening and self-reflection. The meeting ends a few minutes later. No discussion of projects, clients, or deadlines. Just a declaration of ideological war on our old way of doing things. The atmosphere in the office is weird for the rest of the day. People are talking in hushed tones. The consensus is basically, what the hell was that? We figured maybe it was just first-day nerves, her trying to make a strong impression. We were wrong. The next morning, there's an email in our inboxes. Subject, mandatory weekly workshop, the path to an aware workplace. The first session is that Friday. Attendance is not optional, so Friday comes and we all shuffle into the conference room again. The screen at the front has a title slide, Unpacking Male Privilege and Its Impact on Collaboration. My stomach sinks. This is really happening. For an hour, Barbara lectures us. She has charts and graphs, not about market trends, but about societal inequalities. She uses phrases like systemic advantages and unconscious bias. Then comes the interactive portion. She wants all the men in the room to go around, one by one, and share an example of a time they recognized their own privilege. Absolute dead silence. You could hear a pin drop. Nobody wants to do this. It's a minefield. A few guys mumble some vague nonsense just to get it over with. Then it's my turn. I just say, I don't have anything to share. I'd prefer to just listen. Barbara's eyes lock onto me. Tom, the purpose of this exercise isn't to be comfortable. It's to grow. Resisting the process is a sign that you're the one who needs it most. I just shrug. I'm here to do my job, and I'm very good at it. I don't see how this relates to our department's performance. The temperature in the room drops by 20 degrees. She gives me a cold look and says, "We'll circle back to that mindset later." She then looks at Ronald, who has his hand up again, practically vibrating with excitement. He stands up and delivers a prepared speech. He talks about how he once explained a concept to a female colleague and later realized it was mansplaining. He says he's been on a journey of re-education ever since. It was the most pathetic, transparent display of bootlicking I'd ever seen. Barbara is beaming. Thank you, Ronald. That's what true allyship looks like. It takes courage to be that vulnerable. The workshop ends, and we all slink back to our desks. The damage is done. The office is now divided. There's Barbara's inner circle, Ronald and a couple of the women who are all in on the new regime. And then there's everyone else. The rest of us just want to be left alone to work. But that's not part of the plan. The next week, the changes start to affect the actual work. We have a huge ongoing project for our biggest client. I've been the lead on this account for 3 years. I know their needs inside and out. It's a complex, high-stakes project. Naturally, I assume I'll continue to lead it. Barbara calls me into her office. She tells me she's restructuring the project teams to promote equity. She's taking me off the big client project. She's giving the lead role to Grace. My jaw almost hits the floor. Grace is smart, but she's been with the company for less than 2 years. She has zero experience with a client of this magnitude. She's not ready for it. I try to explain this professionally. Barbara, with all due respect, this client has very specific expectations. There's a lot of history and nuance here. Putting someone with less experience in charge is incredibly risky. She just looks at me with that same cold, condescending expression. What I'm hearing, Tom, is that you don't believe a woman is capable of leading this project. It seems we have more to unpack regarding your biases. It was a complete shutdown. She twisted my professional concern into a personal failing. There was no arguing. She reassigned me to a legacy data audit. It's grunt work, the kind of stuff we usually give to interns. I walked out of her office feeling completely demoralized. It wasn't about losing the project. It was about the principle. My years of hard work, my expertise, my proven track record, all of it meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was her agenda. The next few weeks were a nightmare. The weekly workshops continued, each one more ridiculous than the last. One was about problematic language. We were given a list of banned words and phrases. Guys was out when addressing a mixed gender group. Manpower was forbidden. Even sanity check was deemed offensive to people with mental health issues. Ronald appointed himself the unofficial language police. He'd pop up in conversations. Actually, the preferred term is... He'd send emails correcting people's phrasing. He CC'd Barbara on every single one. People started avoiding him, like the plague. Conversations around the office died. The friendly banter was gone. Everyone was afraid of saying the wrong thing. The office became a library of silent, anxious people staring at their screens. Meanwhile, Grace was struggling with the big client project. It was obvious to everyone. She was working late every night, looking stressed out of her mind. The client was getting impatient. Deadlines were being missed. One afternoon, she quietly came over to my desk. "Tom, can I ask you a quick question about the historical data for this client? I'm having trouble making sense of it." I felt bad for her. It wasn't her fault she was in this position. She was set up to fail. I was happy to help. I started walking her through the old reports, explaining the context. We were just talking about spreadsheets and data points, purely professional. Suddenly, Barbara's shadow falls over my desk. She was just standing there, arms crossed. "Grace, can I see you in my office? Now." Her tone was sharp. Grace looked terrified. She scurried off to Barbara's office. I couldn't hear what was being said, but the door was glass. I could see Barbara talking, gesticulating wildly. Grace just stood there, looking at the floor, nodding. After about 15 minutes, Grace came out, her eyes red. She walked straight to her desk and didn't look at me for the rest of the day. Later, another colleague told me what happened. She'd overheard part of it. Barbara had reamed Grace out. She accused her of demonstrating a lack of confidence and undermining female leadership by seeking validation from a male subordinate. She basically told Grace that asking me for help was a betrayal of the cause. That was a new low. Not only was Barbara's ideology messing with our work, but she was now actively preventing people from collaborating and helping each other. The whole point of a team was being destroyed. After that incident, nobody asked me for help, and I stopped offering. I just came in, did my boring audit work, put my headphones on, and went home. This was my gray rock strategy. Be as boring and unresponsive as possible. Don't give her any ammunition. Morale was in the toilet. Two of our best senior analysts, both guys I'd worked with for years, quit within a week of each other. They both had new jobs lined up. When they left, it felt like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Instead of seeing this as a warning sign, Barbara spun it as a positive. In the next workshop, she announced their departure as a necessary shedding of the old guard and a chance to bring in new talent that aligns with our core values. The productivity of our department, which had once been the pride of the company, fell off a cliff. It was a slow-motion train wreck. Every decision was now filtered through Barbara's ideological lens. Project assignments, hiring decisions, even who got credit for a successful idea. If an idea came from one of her favorite employees, it was brilliant. If it came from someone like me, it was unimaginative or not aligned with our new direction. She started implementing equity-based metrics for performance reviews. It was no longer just about the quality and timeliness of your work. It also included a score for your engagement in diversity and inclusion initiatives. This basically meant that if you didn't enthusiastically participate in her workshops and parrot her talking points, you were marked down. Ronald, of course, was getting perfect scores. He was now co-hosting the workshops with her. His actual work output had dropped to near zero, but according to the new system, he was the star employee. The whole thing felt like a surreal joke. I started documenting everything, not for any specific purpose at first, just to keep my own sanity. I saved emails, I took notes after meetings, I documented every instance of a work-related decision being made for purely ideological reasons. I had a folder on my personal drive that was growing by the day. I figured, at the very least, it would be useful if she ever tried to fire me. I'd have a record of what had been going on. The rest of the team was in a state of quiet despair. We'd talk sometimes in the parking lot or through private messages, where we couldn't be overheard. The sentiment was always the same. How long can this last? Is anyone from corporate paying attention? The answer, it seemed, was no. As long as Barbara used the right buzzwords, she was untouchable. She had the perfect shield. Any criticism of her performance could be deflected as an attack on her progressive ideals. Questioning her competence was framed as being against diversity. Pointing out that our results were tanking was framed as a resistance to change. She had created a system where she couldn't fail, only be failed by those who weren't enlightened enough to understand her genius. The atmosphere was oppressive. It felt like living in a totalitarian state, but with more PowerPoint presentations. I kept my head down, did my work, and added to my file. I was just biding my time, waiting for something to happen. I knew deep down that a system this dysfunctional couldn't last forever. Something had to break. It was just a matter of when and how badly. It was about to get much, much worse. The breaking point started, as it often does, with a big client. Not just any client. This was the one. The contract that basically paid all our salaries. They'd been with the company for over a decade. We had a great relationship with them, built on years of solid results and trust. The contract was up for renewal, a massive multi-year deal. Normally, this would be an all-hands-on-deck situation, with our most experienced people leading the charge to put together the renewal proposal and presentation. That would have been me and the two senior guys who had already quit. With them gone, I was the only one left with deep institutional knowledge of this client's account. I expected, despite everything, that Barbara would have to put me on the project. It was a matter of simple business logic. You don't send in the B team to secure your most important source of revenue. Once again, I had underestimated her commitment to the cause. She announced the project team in one of her weekly meetings. She would be the project lead herself. The team consisted of Grace, 2 other junior female analysts, and, of course, Ronald. Not a single person with more than 2 years of experience in our department. I wasn't just left off the team. I was explicitly told to have no contact with them regarding the project. "We need fresh perspectives," Barbara announced to the department. "We can't rely on the old ways of thinking that have perpetuated a stale, homogeneous culture." It was a direct shot at me. Everyone in the room knew it. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, feeling a strange sense of calm. It was the calm you feel when you see a car speeding towards a brick wall and you know there's nothing you can do to stop it. You can only watch. The renewal team was given its own private section of the office to work in. They had closed-door meetings and worked with a level of secrecy that was completely bizarre. They were ideating a paradigm-shifting proposal, as Barbara put it. The rest of us were left to handle the day-to-day stuff, effectively cut off from the most important work in the department's history. The deadline for the proposal was about a month away. As the days ticked by, I couldn't help but notice a few things. The team was working long hours, but there was a constant sense of chaos coming from their corner of the office. I'd overhear snippets of conversation. They weren't talking about data, or ROI, or the client's key performance indicators. They were talking about narratives, social impact, and brand activism. They were designing a proposal based not on what the client's business actually needed, but on what they thought a progressive, modern company should want. About a week before the final presentation was due, I was leaving the office late. I walked past the recycling bin and saw a stack of printouts on top. It was a draft of their presentation slides. My curiosity got the better of me. I picked them up and took them back to my desk. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a disaster. The entire proposal was built around a new marketing strategy that pushed a heavy-handed social justice message. It had nothing to do with the client's product or their customer base. It was full of vague, unquantifiable goals like fostering community dialogue and amplifying marginalized voices. The data they used to support this new direction was cherry-picked at best, and in some cases, just plain wrong. I knew this client. They were a conservative, numbers-driven company. The old-school CEO there cared about one thing: profit. He would look at this proposal and laugh them out of the room. I had a choice to make. I could stay quiet, let them crash and burn, and say, "I told you so." But the company's survival was on the line. People's jobs were at stake. My professional integrity wouldn't let me just sit back and watch the ship sink because of a captain who was steering it towards an iceberg on purpose. So I did what I thought was the right thing. I went home and spent the entire evening writing a detailed, professional, and respectful email. I didn't make it personal. I didn't mention Barbara's ideology. I just focused on the facts. I started by saying, I happened to see a draft of the proposal and wanted to offer some historical context that might be helpful. I then laid out, point by point, why their strategy was a massive risk. Point 1. The client's customer demographic is X. The proposed campaign targets Y, which is a mismatch. Point 2. The proposal forecasts a 15% growth based on social engagement metrics, but our historical data for this client shows zero correlation between social buzz and actual sales. Point 3. The CEO has personally rejected similar brand purpose campaigns in the past. I've attached the minutes from the Q3 meeting in 2019 where he called it fluff. I ended the email by offering a concrete, data-backed alternative strategy that I knew would appeal to them. It was a safe, conservative plan, but it was guaranteed to get the contract renewed. I reread the email 10 times to make sure there was nothing that could be misinterpreted as an attack. It was dry, factual, and constructive. I sent it directly to Barbara, and only to Barbara. I hit send and went to bed, feeling like I had at least done my due diligence. I woke up the next morning to a firestorm. Barbara had not taken my email as a helpful suggestion. She had taken it as a declaration of war. She forwarded my email to the entire department. And she CC'd her own boss and the head of HR, a woman named Renee. Above my carefully worded professional email, she wrote her own introduction. Team, I am sharing this with you all as a teachable moment. This is a textbook example of how entrenched privilege attempts to sabotage progressive leadership. She went on. Tom's unsolicited and frankly disrespectful email is a clear case of mansplaining. He is attempting to undermine the authority of this team because he is uncomfortable with seeing women in charge. His actions are not collaborative, they are an act of professional sabotage. She ended with, "We will be proceeding with our original vision, which is innovative and forward-thinking. We will not be intimidated by those who cling to the past. Tom, we will discuss your hostile and unprofessional behavior with HR." I just sat at my desk, staring at the screen. I was publicly humiliated, accused of being a saboteur and a sexist for trying to prevent a multi-million-dollar disaster. My inbox started blowing up with instant messages from colleagues. "This is insane. Don't let her get to you, man. We know you were right. Be careful. She's trying to get you fired." Even Grace sent me a private message, just a single line. "I'm so sorry, Tom." I appreciated the support, but it didn't change the fact that I now had a target on my back. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I couldn't focus on work. I just kept rereading the email chain, my professional data-driven analysis, followed by her hysterical ad hominem attack. It was all there in black and white. That evening, I went home and opened the secret folder on my computer. I added this latest email chain to the collection. It was the centerpiece, the smoking gun. The day of the big presentation arrived. Barbara and her team, all dressed in power suits, walked into the main boardroom to meet with the client's executive team. The rest of us were just sitting at our desks, pretending to work, waiting for the verdict. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. After just 45 minutes, the door to the boardroom burst open. The client's CEO stormed out, his face red with anger. He didn't even look at us. He just marched towards the elevators with his team trailing behind him. A few moments later, Barbara and her team shuffled out of the boardroom. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. Barbara's face was pale. Grace looked like she was about to cry. Ronald was staring at the floor, avoiding eye contact with anyone. They walked back to their desks in complete silence. We didn't need an announcement. We knew what had happened. They had failed. An hour later, the official email came down from the senior vice president. The client had declined to renew their contract. The email was short and cold. It mentioned a misalignment of strategic vision and concluded with, "This outcome is a significant financial blow to the company. We will be reevaluating the structure and leadership of several departments in the coming days." The office was silent. Not the oppressed silence of the past few months, but a heavy, shocked silence. This wasn't just office drama anymore. This was real. The company had lost millions of dollars. Jobs were now on the line, and everyone in that department knew exactly who was to blame. But Barbara wasn't going down without a fight. She immediately went into damage control mode. She called an emergency meeting with the senior VP and Renee from HR. We found out later what her story was. She told them that her proposal was brilliant, but that the client had been poisoned against it. She claimed that there was a toxic element within her own department that had actively worked to undermine the project from the start. And her prime suspect, the ringleader of this internal rebellion, was me. As proof, she presented the email I had sent her. She twisted it completely. She claimed I had deliberately tried to shake her confidence and the team's morale right before the most important presentation of their careers. She framed my data-backed warnings as an attempt to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. She was trying to make me the scapegoat for her own catastrophic failure. The next morning, I received an email from Renee in HR. Subject, formal meeting request. It said I was required to attend a meeting with her and Barbara that afternoon to discuss recent events and your role in the project. This was it, the showdown. She wasn't just trying to get me fired, she was trying to ruin my professional reputation on the way out. For the first time in months, I didn't feel fear or despair. I felt angry, a cold, clear anger. I spent the morning preparing. I went through my secret folder. I organized everything chronologically. I printed out the key emails, the project plans, the performance data for the department showing the steep decline since her arrival. I put it all into a neat, professional-looking binder. I was ready. Just before lunch, something unexpected happened. Grace appeared at my desk. Her face was set with a new kind of determination. "Tom," she said, her voice low but steady. "Can we talk? somewhere private. We went down to the coffee shop in the lobby. We sat down, and she just looked at me. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I saw what she did. She lied. She blamed you for her own mistakes. I was in that meeting with the client. It was a bloodbath. They hated the pitch. They called it condescending and out of touch. Everything you warned us about happened, exactly as you said it would." She took a deep breath. I was a fool. I believed all that stuff she was saying. I thought it was progressive, but it's not. It's just toxic. It's an excuse to bully people and avoid accountability. She looked me straight in the eye. "I'm going to HR. I'm going to tell them everything, and I'm not the only one." A few of the others, they're ready to talk too. "We're not going to let her pin this on you." I was stunned. It was a turning point. The silent majority was finally finding its voice. "Grace," I said, "thank you. That means a lot. But be careful. She'll come after you." "Let her try," Grace replied. "I'm done being scared." We went back upstairs. It felt like the whole dynamic in the office had shifted. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. A sense of rebellion. The pieces were all in place for the final act. My meeting was at 2 p.m. I walked towards the HR conference room, my binder of evidence under my arm. I was ready for the fight of my life. I walked into the conference room, and the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Renee, the HR manager, was at the head of the table. She had a neutral, unreadable expression. Barbara was sitting to one side, looking smug and confident. She had a folder of her own in front of her. She gave me a look of pure contempt as I sat down opposite her. "Thank you for coming, Tom," Renee began, her voice calm and professional. "We're here to discuss the serious issues surrounding the failure of the client renewal and the allegations of unprofessional conduct." Barbara immediately jumped in. "I think unprofessional is putting it mildly," she said, directing her words at Renee but staring at me. "What we have here is a case of targeted harassment and sabotage. Tom has fostered a hostile environment from the day I arrived, resisting every positive change I've tried to implement." She opened her folder. "He's been insubordinate, uncooperative, and his cynical attitude has poisoned the morale of the team. And this email," she slid a copy of my email across the table, "is the final proof. A blatant attempt to undermine my leadership at the most critical juncture." Renee looked at the email, then at me. "Tom, what is your response to this?" I took a deep breath. I pushed my own binder to the center of the table. "My response," I said, my voice steady, "is that Barbara is creating a false narrative to cover for her own catastrophic mismanagement." I opened the binder. "This isn't about my attitude. This is about performance. Let's start with Exhibit A, the department's performance metrics for the 6 months before Barbara arrived and the 6 months since." I turned the binder around so Renee could see. There were 2 simple line graphs, one showing our productivity, high and stable, the other showing a nosedive that started the month Barbara took over. Our department went from being the most productive in the company to the least in under half a year. That's not a coincidence. Barbara tried to interrupt. "That's because we were undergoing a period of cultural transformation." "Let's call it what it was," I cut her off. "It was a period of mandatory time-wasting workshops that had nothing to do with our work. It was a period where experienced employees were sidelined based on their gender, and key projects were given to inexperienced people who were set up to fail." I flipped the page. Exhibit B, a list of the top-performing employees who have resigned since Barbara took over, with copies of their exit interview comments citing poor leadership and a toxic environment as their reason for leaving. Renee's eyes widened slightly as she read the names. I kept going, turning page after page. I showed her the project assignments, highlighting how they were consistently given to women regardless of experience. I showed her the emails from Ronald, the self-appointed language police, with Barbara CC'd and praising his vigilance. Finally, I got to the email chain about the client proposal. "And this," I said, pointing to my original email, "was not sabotage. It was a good faith attempt to prevent exactly what ended up happening. It was a warning, backed by data and historical precedent." "And this," I tapped her vicious reply, "was the response. Not a professional disagreement, not a discussion about the data, but a personal attack and a public humiliation." I leaned back in my chair. "Everything you need to know is in this binder. The facts speak for themselves." Barbara was sputtering, her face turning blotchy and red. "This is a preposterous distortion. He's twisting everything. He's the problem." Renee held up a hand to silence her. She looked at me, then at my binder, then back at Barbara. "Barbara, I appreciate your perspective," she said in that carefully neutral HR tone. "But I have to say, the documentation Tom has provided is comprehensive." Just then, there was a soft knock on the conference room door. Renee looked up, slightly annoyed. "Yes?" The door opened, and it was Grace. "Renee, I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice shaking a little, but her eyes were firm. "But I have something I need to tell you. It can't wait." Barbara shot Grace a look that could kill. "Grace, this is a private meeting. You need to leave." "No," Renee said, looking at Grace with new interest. "Let her speak." Grace stepped into the room. She was holding her own small stack of papers. "I was the lead on the client project," she said, her voice getting stronger. "Barbara is telling you that Tom sabotaged us. That is not true. He tried to help us. He warned us. We were told to ignore him." She laid her papers on the table. They were internal emails from the project team. "This is an email from Barbara to the team after Tom sent his warning. She instructed us not to speak with him and called him a dinosaur trying to protect his fragile ego. And this," she pointed to another document, "is a summary of the feedback from the client meeting. The client's exact words were that our proposal was insulting to their intelligence and a lecture, not a business plan. The failure was 100% on us and on the strategy Barbara forced on us." The room was dead silent. Barbara looked from Grace to me and then to Renee. She looked like a trapped animal. Her smug confidence had completely evaporated. "This is a conspiracy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They've all turned against me." Renee closed my binder slowly. She looked at Barbara, and for the first time, her expression was not neutral. It was cold. "Barbara," she said, "I think we're done here. I'm going to have to ask you to go back to your desk. We'll continue this conversation with senior management later." The meeting was over. The next 24 hours were the strangest I've ever experienced at that company. The news of what happened in that meeting spread like wildfire. Barbara stayed in her glass-walled office all afternoon, making frantic phone calls. She didn't come out. Ronald was nowhere to be seen. Someone said he'd called in sick. Coward. The atmosphere in the office was electric. The fear was gone, replaced by a buzzing anticipation. People were openly talking about it. They were coming up to my desk and to Grace's, patting us on the back. "Thank you for doing that. You're a hero, man." It was surreal. For months, we'd all been living under this cloud of oppression, and now, finally, the sun was starting to break through. The next day, around mid-morning, it happened. Renee walked out onto the office floor. She was accompanied by a guy I recognized as the head of corporate security. They walked straight to Barbara's office and went inside. We all pretended to be working, but every single person was watching. They were in there for about 10 minutes. The door opened. Barbara walked out, carrying one of those standard cardboard boxes for personal belongings. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She wouldn't look at anyone. She walked the long walk from her office to the elevators, past all the desks of the people she had tormented. The security guard followed a few paces behind her. Absolute silence. You could have heard a mouse sneeze. As she passed Ronald's empty desk, there was a small, almost imperceptible smirk on someone's face. The elevator doors dinged open. She stepped inside, the doors closed, and she was gone. For a second, there was still silence. And then, someone in the back of the office started clapping, just a slow, steady clap. Then, someone else joined in. And another. Soon, the whole department was applauding. It wasn't loud or rowdy. It was a release. A wave of collective relief washing over all of us. Grace and I caught each other's eye across the room, and we both just smiled. An hour later, an email from the senior VP went out to the whole company. It announced that Barbara was no longer with the company, effective immediately. It also announced that I had been appointed as the interim head of the department, my first act as the boss. I sent out a one-line email to the team. Subject, an update. All mandatory weekly workshops are canceled, effective immediately. Let's get back to work. The healing process began. We lost the big client, and the company took a hit, but we survived. We slowly started to rebuild the department. We hired back one of the senior guys who had quit. We focused on results and collaboration. The culture didn't change overnight, but the oppressive atmosphere lifted instantly. People started talking and laughing again. The office felt like a workplace, not a re-education camp. Ronald came back to work a few days later, trying to pretend nothing had happened. He tried to buddy up to me. I just assigned him to the legacy data audit I'd been stuck with for months. He got the message. He quit a month later. Grace became my right-hand person, a truly talented analyst now that she was free to actually do her job. It was a long, brutal fight. But in the end, we won. We didn't win by yelling or protesting. We won with facts, with documentation, and with the simple, undeniable truth. Competence beat ideology, and it was a beautiful thing to see.